Romans 12:10. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Give preference to one another in honor. In the New American Standard Version of the Bible, translation of the Bible, the word is devoted. Be devoted. We'll look at the term brotherly love in another episode of our God Words series, theological vocabulary that helps us understand the fellowship into which God has invited us. Devoted is an interesting translation for the word here. So let's do a little bit of Greek grammar. In Koine Greek, the Greek of the New Testament time, there are 4 words that we can translate love. Eros is not in the Bible. Eros was commonly understood as sexual interaction. We often say making love when we're referring to the sexual act. And we're going to dismiss that one for our conversation here. Agape is probably the word that is used most often in the New Testament that we translate love. And I have another conversation about agape. I'll link that in the description below. It's a unique kind of love. It really means sacrificing that which I want for the benefit of the other. And it's the love that we find in John 3:16, for God so loved the world. For God so had agape for the world. Another very common word for love is the word philos. Now, that's the noun form. Phileo would be a masculine verb form. And this is a word that has an interesting use at the end of John's Gospel. And John recorded a conversation between Peter and Jesus, where Jesus asked Peter if he loved him. He said, "Peter, do you love me?" And he used the word agape. If we were to literally, I guess not translate, but expand on the meaning there, we might say he asked Peter if Peter was willing to sacrifice himself for Jesus. Peter, do you love me to the extent that you're willing to sacrifice yourself for me? Peter replied to Jesus' question with the word phileo. Yes, Lord, you know that I love you, that I phileo. And the word phileo, we translate love, but it doesn't have the same concept or sense of sacrificing oneself that agape does. It's more liking and affection. Yeah, we call it love. It's the love that a parent has for children, a child. It's the love that brothers and sisters have for each other. We might call it familial love. So we have eros, we have agape, we have philos. There's another word that doesn't appear in the New Testament by itself, except in the negative, or as a compound, and that is the word storge. It's another Greek word, and when the Greeks used this word, they would have understood another form of familial or friend-to-friend love. I suppose in some ways it's very similar to the Greek word philos, the love word philos. And yet, obviously, within Greek culture, there would have been some difference to it, considering it's a separate word, although, maybe in many ways synonymous to philos. However, it's interesting that here in Romans chapter 12, verse 10, the New American Standard has translated this term devoted, and what we find when we look at the language that Paul actually used, Greek, he made a compound word out of philos and storge. So it's φιλόστοργοι. And so it's an interesting look at the use of language, and then maybe a little bit of a puzzle for us to try to interpret it. And maybe devoted has the same sense to it. It's not the same devoted, however, that we find, for example, in Acts chapter 2, at the end of Acts chapter 2, where Luke is telling about what was happening in the early church, where he said that the early Christians were devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to prayer, and to breaking of bread, to sacrificial giving. And I suppose the difference is that in Acts chapter 2, that devotion is to ideas, whereas here in Romans 12:10, the devotion is to each other. And what we're finding in this term is that we are called, because of God's compassion for us, because of God's mercy for us, that we find in the beginning of chapter 12, therefore, by the mercies of God, or therefore by the compassions of God, offer yourselves as living sacrifices, that a part of offering ourselves as a living sacrifice to God is this interaction with each other. That when our old nature is put to death and we are given a new nature, that happens in baptism according to Romans chapter 6, that we are transformed, that we are changed, and that we are then, in the following of Romans chapter 6, encouraged, strongly encouraged, and maybe we would even say commanded, because there's a negative and a positive, not to offer our bodies as tools, as instruments for unrighteousness, that is, that we would not do things that are wrong, but that instead we would offer our bodies as tools, that we would do those things that are righteous, that are right, recognizing that whoever we obey, that's our master, that we are slaves of whatever we obey. So if we are offering our bodies to do things that are wrong, to unrighteousness and evil, then we are enslaving ourselves to sin, and the result of that is death, eternal separation from God. But when, having been transformed through our baptism, which is participation in the death and resurrection of Jesus, then we offer our bodies to do that which is right. And one of the things that is right, that we offer ourselves as living sacrifices, is this devotion to each other. This loving of each other. These two words combined, philos and storge, loving each other, caring for each other, looking out for each other, recognizing that we need to be a priority to each other, and that we need to prioritize the rest of those who are in the family of God as we live out our lives. And so at that point, we might even cross back into agape, which was in 2 verses earlier. That love, agape, is to be genuine. And that a part of that is that we care for each other, that we are concerned about each other, that we are taking care of each other, that we are, we might say, loving each other. An interesting word, not really part of our English vocabulary, a little bit hard to translate, and yet a wonderful concept that flows from what God has done for us. That because God has had agape for us, has agape for us continually, because he was motivated by agape, selfless, self-sacrificing love, to offer himself for us to forgive our sins. He then calls on us for that to be genuine in us, but also to flow out in this devotion, in this giving, in this caring for, in this watching out for each other in the family of God. Thank you for being a part of the conversation, and God bless you.